Rotation is locked. Rotate device back. What the fuck? Hello, everybody. Okay, so broadcasting live. Didn't realize it's on till now, and I hope this comes out the right way up. But I've been requested by one of my many loyal viewers to give a speech about why everybody ought to respect Mohammad Ali Jinnah. Well, for so many reasons, but just in case you don't know, he is the founder of Pakistan. Read the American historian Stanley Walpott, who is author of one of the most authoritative biographies of M.A. Jinnah, and he said that, not many people create a new country, change the map of the world and all that. Jinnah did this, and it was really through iron will, and it was also through his vociferation as an orator. So Jinnah, he was born in Karachi, Sindh, back then British India, and he was a man of the most impressive intellectual attainments. Despite coming from a family without great connections, he managed to go to London and to be called to the Bar of England and Wales. So although Sindhi was his mother tongue, achieved absolute mastery of English and Latin. Of course, he had to pass an exam in Latin to be a barrister, that's a lawyer in England at the time, and go back to India and practice there, mostly in Bombay, as it then was, Mumbai. So 25th of December, every year, people celebrate that. I think it's no coincidence that Jinnah was born on that day, and people around the world, they celebrate that day to mark the birth of our saviour, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And because he was so morally upstanding and set such a fine example for people all around the globe, not in Pakistan. So he is a hero to many. His is a name that shall echo down the centuries. I've been to his mausoleum in Karachi, seeking to wreak vengeance upon us. And the Mughal emperors, they had ruled. There had been obviously Muslim supremacy back then, and but the Muslims of the 20th century weren't to be held accountable for what their forebears had done. But not all Hindus would see it that way. Would say, we're going to exact revenge upon you. We're going to get our own back. You did it to us. There were issues such as the Ayodhya Mosque, an issue which separates even decades later. You may remember at 1992, Lal Krishnan Advani advocating for destroying this mosque in Varanasi, or Benares as it formerly was, and building a Hindu temple on that site. So there were all sorts of disputes relating to issues of that nature, and that's why Jinnah advanced this two-nation theory. That is the notion that Muslims and Hindus are different nations, saying, well, they eat different clothes, they wear different clothes, they eat different food, their family law is different, that's still recognized under Indian law even, and they have different music. Some Muslims not keen on music at all, and they're different in almost every regard. He said the only thing they have in common is their slavery to the British. They sometimes speak different languages, all right, sometimes they speak the same language. You're a Punjabi, whether you're a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh, and your Punjabi will be your language. And that is that. So remember, Islam had come to South Asia in the 8th century AD with Muhammad bin Qasim, and there had been internecine conflict between the two faiths all the time. Not always. Sometimes there been cooperation. And the Muslims were unlikely to start these rows most of the time. The small man is not going to start a fight against the big man because, well, the Muslims were heavily outnumbered. They would be moronic to do so. So they had achieved dominion over certain provinces of India for some time, the Mughals dominating North India for a couple of centuries. So he said we must have our own Muslim homeland, and he agitated for that. And nobody would doubt that in what's now Pakistan and Bangladesh, a high majority of people wanted this by 1940. Look at the Lahore Declaration, subsequently called the Pakistan Declaration. And in some of the minority provinces, many Muslims agree with this as well. They have to become muhajirs, the refugees who fled to Pakistan east and west. Of course, some of them, particularly from Bihar, moved to East Pakistan. It's now Bangladesh. And even the Congress Party agreed in the end, though they did it with a heavy heart. They did vote for the partition of India, so they can't lay the blame at anyone else's door. And this was despite the obstinate opposition of London. Lord Mountbatten, he didn't want this to happen. It's widely rumoured that his wife, Edwina, was having an extramarital affair with Jawaharlal Nehru, the leader of the Congress Party, and subsequently the first Prime Minister of India. And Lord Mountbatten was a very unusual chap, bisexual, a willing cuckold, but because of this adulterous affair that his wife was having with Nehru, Nehru had a hold over the Mountbatten couple, was able to blackmail them and all that, and therefore Lord Mountbatten was going to tilt his decisions heavily towards India and be prejudiced against Pakistan. And so It's very easy to decide what to do about the majority provinces. The Muslim majority provinces were going to be part of Pakistan. What about ones like Bengal and the Punjab, which were almost evenly split between Muslims and non-Muslims? And that's why Sir Cyril Radcliffe came out, this academic from All Souls College, Oxford, and he landed in India for the very first time in his life, supposed to give him a certain neutrality, a blank canvas coming to it with no axe to grind, without fear or favour, to draw the line, a thankless task. It was certain that wherever he drew this line, then contumely would be brought down on his head, because he couldn't please everyone and he was almost certain to displease everyone. So that was that. We all know what happened. The 14th of August, 1947, Pakistan became a reality. Only a few years earlier, Jinnah himself had said it was an impossible dream. We now know, of course, that he was terminally ill, but he faced his death with the great fortitude which is typical of men of his faith. He was confident that a paradise awaited him due to his virtuous deeds. And he didn't stint despite the risk of assassination by certain Hindu fanatics. And indeed, when he was driving through Karachi in an open car on the day of Pakistani independence, he was warned that there was a high chance he'd be bumped off by a Hindu fanatic posing a Muslim in the crowd, and Lord Mountbatten brought him back alive. That was that. So he quite rightly rebuffed Earl Mountbatten of Burma's arrogant suggestion that he should be the first Governor-General of Pakistan, and indeed Jinnah took this mantle for himself as well as President of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly is now the National Assembly, as in effectively Prime Minister, but his title was President of the Constituent Assembly. So look at the Kashmir dispute. I mean, Jinnah cannot be held accountable for this. Everybody knows that a very high majority of people in Jammu and Kashmir were of the Mohammedan faith, and the majority of them naturally wished to accede to Pakistan, possibly become independent. They certainly didn't want to be part of India, of Hindu-dominated India. I know they said, oh, we're a secular state, but in reality we see that's not true. Many states have got anti-beef laws and so forth. Pakistan is at least honest about being a religiously based country. And so many of the Congress leaders were conspicuous Hindus. You know, look at Gandhi, for example. And yes, there were a handful of Muslims in the Congress Party, but widely regarded as Uncle Toms by their co-religionists, by people who'd sold out their faith for a few rupees. But anyway, so Jammu and Kashmir, we know that the people of Jammu and Kashmir groaned under the oppression of this profligate playboy Hari Singh, the Maharaja, and in a completely undemocratic display of royal fiat, go back to the Middle Ages in the way he's behaving, saying he was going to accede to India, when some tribesmen from the northwest frontier province were liberating their brothers in Jammu and Kashmir from this heavy yoke of oppression. And so it's questionable whether the Maharaja of Kashmir did actually contact the government of India and accede properly or not anyway. But the Indian army was airlifted to Srinagar and managed to prevent the city being liberated by Pakistani forces, and then war broke out. That was that. So that's the Jammu and Kashmir issue, which is an open wound to this day. Coming on to Bangladesh, people sometimes hold this against Jinnah. Well, the people of East Pakistan, they were part of Pakistan, that was that. You don't get to revisit the issue. And it's true that the situation was mishandled by his successors. He had many unworthy heirs. And many leaders around the world, including Pakistan, would do well to study Jinnah's example and would profit by emulating the way that he behaved. So I shan't go into too much detail into what happened in East Pakistan, since strictly speaking that's beyond the remit of this video. Much of it was a natural disaster, a cyclone, and I realised that relief was insufficient. But the insurrection which kicked off in Bangladesh in 1971, that the Indians put them up to that, armed and trained. The Mukti Bahini and the Soviets were heavily involved as well. Anything to enfeeble an American ally. Well, it worked for them. And that was that, and Pakistan was in a hopeless situation fighting this two-front war, heavily outnumbered. We know the rest. But actually, Bangladesh does vindicate the two-nation theory. The Bangladeshis, they could have rejoined India, but they didn't. Remember, Bangladesh independence was only 24 years after the partition of India. It was not even a generation earlier. That would have been the obvious thing to do, but they chose not to do so. And we've seen the military coups they've had since, and the one who led them into independence being butchered by his own army a few years later, is a very underdeveloped country, and that's that. And they're seeking vengeance on people who supported Pakistan even now. The past few years, some of them have been hanged for what went on in the 1970s, despite being told that bygones were bygones. So Pakistan is not going away anytime soon. And Pakistani national identity is vibrant, and the resilience of the people is plain for everyone to see, and they shall carry on battling for the emancipation of Jammu and Kashmir. Remember, the United Nations said that a plebiscite needs to be held in its future, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir should determine their destiny. Do they wish to be part of India? Do they wish to be independent? If they were independent, they might choose to merge with Pakistan, but that's so far that hasn't happened. Now, as they are administered, as a third of the land there is administered by Pakistan, that Pakistan, being completely fair, has permitted the people of Jammu and Kashmir, of Azad Kashmir, representation in the Pakistani National Assembly. But Jammu and Kashmir has got its own flag. They're quite dependent on Pakistan because, of course, they're battling for self-assertion against the Republic of India. So, yes, Pakistan faces some problems, but to a large extent these are caused by India, by raw research and analysis wing. There are many raw wounds in Pakistan which are caused by the machinations of the Indian Secret Service, their cloak and dagger operations, setting off bombs, arming terrorists, stirring up some Baluchis to revolt. And of course, there are many good, decent Baluchis who are loyal citizens of Pakistan, and they abhor this monstrous terrorist organization which is trying to rip the country apart. And Pakistan's been bombed by the United States with drone strikes and all the rest of it. The Taliban spilled over the border. None of that's Jinnah's fault. That's mostly the fault of other countries, or indeed some Pakistani leaders who failed the people, who've been kleptocrats, who've been unworthy of the name of the Qaidi Azum, someone who is respected far and wide. So I think one of the core doctrines of Jinnah is not observed today, because he made it plain. The crucial thing was this would be a homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent, not a Shariat state. And he wanted to model it on Turkey. Yes, almost everyone in Turkey is a Muslim, but it's not a Shariat state. You're free to practice Islam. If a woman wishes to wear a veil, she may do so. It's not essential in Islam, or a hijab. You can eat halal food. You can observe Ramadan. You can go on Hajj. You can do all that. A man can have up to 4 wives and things like that. Although I'm not sure that's allowed in Turkey, but is in Pakistan. You can pray in a mosque 5 times a day. Things of that nature. But there will be no compulsion in this. The state wouldn't mandate you do so. But they wouldn't forbid you do so. And that was that. A homeland, not a Shariat state. Well, obviously in the 1980s, it became one under General Muhammad Zia al-Haq when he overthrew Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And so until the 80s, there were nightclubs, there were bands performing legally, openly. There were even casinos. Alcohol was freely available. But that all came to an end. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It was all over in the 80s. The party was over. And if you read In the Line of Fire by General Pervez Musharraf, who was the military leader, then the president of Pakistan, 1999 to 2008, he said, well, this was done to create a constituency for General al-Haq. There was this referendum with an embarrassingly low turnout. Do you accept him as chief martial law administrator and the reforms he's brought in, and trying to say that if you vote against him, you're more or less voting against the Islamic faith, and very few people were going to do that. So he had to appeal to the fundamentalists, and these fundos were real killjoys, and that's why they wanted to forbid most forms of public entertainment. Well, they got their way, and this is where we are now, but I realise these things continue underground. So what else? Yeah. Self-determination for Jammu and Kashmir, that's the way forward, that's the way to end the conflict. India could withdraw, hand the whole thing over to Pakistan, or allow it to be independent, either or. But certainly these people don't want to be part of the Republic of India. And then nobody would get killed, and there'd be no more money squandered in this fighting, and everyone could be at peace, and then trade routes could open up, and it would add to the prosperity of both countries, and that's it. There's a simple solution. Just do it. Do the right thing. Now, there are some Indian politicians who've found the moral courage to say this, and they're doing so at the risk of their lives, by some Indian ultranationalists who might bump them off, who are gallant enough to say, let's be just. Let's be big enough and magnanimous to say, we got it very badly wrong. Our government got it badly wrong for decades. Tens of thousands of people have paid with their lives for this grievous error, for this crime of holding Jammu and Kashmir in bondage. And we've got to give peace a chance. There is a way forward. No more of these pointless platitudes. There are these ritualistic meetings every few years between statesmen of both sides about the Jammu and Kashmir issue, and no progress is actually made. There'll be some sort of truce. They'll open some transport links. There'll be a bit of commerce done. Then some bombs will be set off by one side or other, and the whole thing will be stopped. The links will be severed because the provocation is so great. And then after a couple of years, it'll go back, and that's really the life cycle. But if we want serious progress to be made, this conflict, it has human and political causes, as a human and political solution, is not going to be solved by fighting, particularly with nuclear weapons. I mean, a nuclear exchange is too horrible to even contemplate. Millions of people would be killed by that. So that there is no military solution. This is going to be solved by talking and not by fighting. And obviously, time for the Indians to negotiate seriously and grant freedom to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Azad Kashmir is called Free Kashmir for a reason. That's what it means in Urdu, because it is free, unlike what's going on in the Indian occupied zone, where obviously hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers still can't bring peace there, and they are absolutely not wanted there by a great majority of the population. And obviously there's been violence at an absolutely enormous scale by the Indian army. I don't wish to impugn the honor of the army of India, and some of them are decent chaps, of course, but huge numbers of civilians have been deliberately slaughtered by the Indian security forces. Security forces is obviously flattering them, and many suspects have been disappeared. They've held political prisoners by the thousand. There's been rape on a very large scale. So all that is disgraceful, and you see that even Jammu and Kashmir's autonomy has been taken away just last week, something which has outraged even many Indians. So unfortunately, the world doesn't recognize this grave injustice, and it infuriates many people, and it's a major driver of terrorism. There's a genuine grievance here which needs to be dealt with, otherwise there shan't ever be peace in South Asia. So in memory of memory of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the people of Jammu and Kashmir are battling for liberty. So what else can I say? We ought to be very grateful to him, and he's been an inspiration to people all around the world who are engaged in similar struggles for freedom. And that's Muhammad Ali Jinnah. I read Rodad Khan's book, A Dream Gone Sour, pointing out that subsequently that things have been mismanaged in Pakistan by successive leaders who did not live up to Jinnah's high standards. And there was just a comment flashed up there a minute ago saying he made Muslims radical. I don't think so. He was actually very, very moderate in all sorts of matters. Certainly believed in gender equality. That's why his sister, well after him, tried to be president, was defeated by Ayub Khan in a not terribly fair presidential election. But he just believed that Muslims would be happier, freer, safer in a Muslim homeland, and who can disagree with that? History has subsequently vindicated what he did for the Muslims of South Asia. Well, he started the whole anti-Israel sentiment in Pakistan. Well, Israel didn't exist as such until 1948. So he died in September 1948. He died, let me see, only 4 months after the foundation of Israel. And so there's the Ummah, the worldwide sense of a Muslim community, which is why many Muslims, because of this sense of fraternity, feel duty-bound to support their fellow Mohammedans in other countries, like in Israel. Right, well, the Balfour Declaration obviously was taken away somewhere else's land. Pakistan was about where Muslims were majorities anyway, in a majority anyway, and he obviously wanted to guarantee the rights of religious minorities. Indeed, he did in Pakistan, which is why Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Parsis, even Jews are permitted to practice their faith, and the minorities are a guaranteed representation of the National Assembly, which is not the case in India, I hasten to add. Well, hypocritical, you could say he's not comparing like with like, because the Balfour Declaration was about bringing in immigrants from Europe, mainly against the wishes of the indigenous populace, and these Jewish people from Europe, they had a tenuous, at best, ancestral connection with that land. So that was that. All right, thank you for your comments. That's enough now. Good night.